in the German army, who decides to try his hand at scenario writing and crafts a half dozen screenplays while convalescing from serious war wounds. The result, Hilder Waren und der Tod, 1917. This is Hilder Waren and Death. Well, it's a big hit. So Fritz Lang forsakes his previous profession as an artist and takes up the movies. A suitably supernatural beginning for an amazing and uncanny film career that would stretch into the 1960s. Now, by the end of World War I, 1918, Lang is a screenwriter and editor. By 1919, he's a full-fledged film director with 2 movies under his belt. Now, Lang's first film scenario contains elements that would become familiar to the Fritz Lang cinematic mold. Hilder Waren and Death, directed by Joe May, scripted by Lang. May was best known at the time for his adventure serials. Hilder Waren and Death is a type of early version of the demonic baby story. It's kind of like Rosemary's Baby. May's wife, Missy May, plays Hilde, a famous actress who gets knocked up by a condemned murderer. She begins to have intense visions of death. Of course, death being an emaciated spectral figure, which, according to cinematic legend, was actually played by Lang himself. This has never been verified, however. The child is born in the father's image, demonic, and has inherited his evil genes. She manages to overcome her maternal instincts and kills her own child, the devil baby. Now, in the finale, Death again appears to her in prison, and she, willingly accepts his embrace. Now, Lang and May craft a highly stylized dark fantasy horror film linking sex and death. Superimpositions introduce the figure of death into everyday scenes of the heroine's life, foreshadowing her eventual fate, her surrender to death's cold embrace. Lang's best-known death movie, Der Mundetad, 1921, puts a different slant on the story, and death becomes the central figure, a sympathetic, weary character, tired of his cosmic responsibilities, but also condemned to repeat his task over and over throughout eternity. Now, Lang's second movie as a screenwriter, Lilith and Lay, 1918, is sadly now lost. No copies are known to exist. This combines the legend of the golem with vampire themes. This was directed by Eric Kobler and scripted by Lang, a director virtually unknown outside of Austria, and the founder of the short-lived Fiat Film Company. Now, the Fiat publicity department issued press releases claiming that Lang's script was inspired by ancient Sanskrit parchments that he found while traveling in Asia. Now, in the movie, the upper-crust scientist hero, Dr. Landov, played by Hans Marschall, is a brilliant researcher who lives a life of isolation in his laboratory. He's consumed by his quest to invent a type of television prototype or telescopic mirror. Essentially 2 large concave mirrors projecting images across a distance. Now, he's convinced by his girlfriend, Lay, Elga Beck, and his best buddy, a sculptor, Ernest Escherich, to take a, much-needed rest. So Marshall travels to India with an archaeologist buddy, where they discover a sacred blood red ruby. They find it at a shaman's grave, along with parchments adorned with Sanskrit writing. Meanwhile, back in Europe, Marshall's best buddy, the sculptor, has fallen in love with Lay, the scientist's girlfriend. So the artist, unable to betray Marshall while he's away and make a play for Lay, he can't do it, he won't do it. He pours his love and pain into a masterpiece of sculpture, a life-size statue of the demoness fertility goddess Lilith, a statue that, looks exactly like Lay, the love that the sculptor can never have. Now, back from India, Marshall translates the Sanskrit text and learns that it is a formula that can bring objects to life. Coincidentally, the sculptor gives the Lilith statue to the scientist, since it's a dead ringer for his fiancée, Lay. Marshall uses the sacred ruby to transform the statue into a beautiful, lightsome creature, and instantly falls in love with it. The archaeologist, meanwhile, returns, Dr. Warman, he returns from India with more parchments and a protective amulet, and begins to translate the text. Now, the soul or consciousness of the revived statue, Lilith, takes up residence in the scientist's prototype television invention, and metamorphoses into a type of psychic vampire. She now lives only as an image on the screen, and Marshall, entranced, watches her becoming stronger and stronger as his own life slowly drains away. The archaeologist intervenes, gives the amulet to Marshall, and warns of impending evil. He returns to his study and begins further work on the second batch of Sanskrit texts. Lilith escapes from the television-like screens, and she is now a living vampire. She attacks Dr. Warman, feeds on his corpse, and tears up the parchments, then vanishes into the night. Now, Dr. Landov, Marshall, becomes very ill. His life essence has been drained away by Lilith. Now, he is nursed back to health by his girlfriend, Lai, and they decide it's time to marry. Meanwhile, Lilith has been ravaging the countryside, growing stronger and stronger, and uses her demonic powers to ruin the engagement party. Now, Lilith, pretending to be Lai, manages to get the protective amulet from Landov/Marshall, who returns to his lab and decides to look into his telescope, only to be horrified to see his fiancée sitting on a divan while Lilith hovers outside her window. This is the moment of truth for the scientist. He must choose between the good, nurturing, loving Lay or the demonic Lilith, who seduces and destroys with the same gesture. The scientist manages to overcome his desire and his fear, and summons up the courage to free himself and his fiancée by smashing the images he has created, the statue and the screens. He does it in a very unusual manner. He attacks his accursed invention with a sacred Tibetan sword, and destroys the statue of Lilith and throws the sacred blood-red ruby into the river. The scientist hero is now content with the idea of domestic life, bliss, with Lai, a more traditional relationship with more normal and less lethal desires. No more torturing himself with the conflicting impulses of love and lust. Now, Lang's script weaves together pulp cliches, the speculative scientist, Asian mysticism, that are given a higher meaning in the film. He also throws in a somber atmosphere, featuring a slow rhythm, combined with flashes of visual intensity. Now, as I mentioned, this is considered a lost film. Well, what does a lost film actually mean? Well, it means that there are no copies, no known copies exist in any official film archive. But like many other quote-unquote lost films, copies may be floating around in private collections. Collections like the Mysterious Angel Archive, for example. Now, Lang's third sex and death fantasy